Some rhythms speak louder than words. When Rosalia walked onto the Tonight Show stage with that magnetic presence and fierce artistic intensity that had made her Spain's most innovative voice, nobody expected her to reveal the most transformative chapter of her healing mission. Jimmy Fallon had planned an energetic interview about Rosalia's latest album and her global success. The audience was ready for the genre-bending creativity and passionate performances that always came with a Rosalia appearance, but what Rosalia was about to confess would silence Studio 6B and prove that sometimes the most important dances happen not on concert stages, but in therapy rooms where nonverbal children discover that their bodies can speak the language their voices cannot. The cameras were rolling, the audience already captivated by Rosalia's dynamic energy, and then she spoke 12 words that changed everything. I teach flamenco to autistic kids who can't speak because rhythm is universal language. What came next wasn't just television, it was a revelation about communication, connection, and the sacred power of movement to bridge the gap between isolated souls and the world that struggles to understand them. Rosalia had always been known for her innovative fusion of traditional flamenco with modern sounds. The artist who honored her cultural roots while pushing boundaries, who used rhythm and movement as her primary means of expression. But what audiences didn't know was that Rosalia's understanding of nonverbal communication had been shaped by her own childhood struggles with severe social anxiety that had left her temporarily selective mute, and that experience had awakened a calling to help children whose neurological differences trapped them in silence that the world interpreted as defiance or disability. The Ritmo del Alma, soul rhythm sessions had begun 7 years earlier, during a period when Rosalia was reflecting on her own childhood experience of being unable to speak in social situations and how flamenco movement had become her first language of emotional expression. The memory of communicating through dance when words felt impossible had given her unique insight into how severely autistic children might use rhythm and movement to connect with others. When I was little, I couldn't speak to strangers or in school for almost 2 years due to anxiety, Rosalia later explained. Everyone thought I was being difficult or rude, but inside I was screaming to communicate. Flamenco became my voice. Through stomping, clapping, moving my body, I could express everything I felt but couldn't say. Severe autism affects roughly 40% of children on the autism spectrum, often resulting in complete or near-complete absence of spoken language. These children frequently possess rich inner worlds and complex thoughts, but lack conventional means of expression, leading to frustration, behavioral challenges, and social isolation as the world around them struggles to understand their needs and feelings. Nonverbal autistic kids are often incredibly intelligent and emotionally complex, Rosalia said with passion. They understand everything happening around them, but they can't communicate their thoughts, feelings, or needs through words. Society sees their silence and assumes emptiness, but their bodies are constantly trying to communicate through movement, repetitive behaviors, and physical responses. Rosalia's first encounter with a severely autistic child had been through a chance meeting at a Barcelona clinic where she had been visiting to support children's music therapy programs. 8-year-old Miguel was completely nonverbal and had been exhibiting increasingly aggressive behaviors that his family and therapists struggled to understand or manage. Miguel would rock back and forth, flap his hands, make repetitive movements that everyone saw as problematic behaviors that needed to be stopped, Rosalia remembered. But when I watched him move, I saw rhythm, I saw patterns, I saw a child whose body was dancing even when no music was playing. The breakthrough had come when Rosalia began mirroring Miguel's movements and adding flamenco rhythms to his natural motion patterns. For the first time in months, Miguel had stopped his aggressive behaviors and had become completely focused and calm, responding to Rosalia's rhythmic interpretations of his own movement language. Miguel's movements weren't random or problematic. They were his way of communicating, Rosalia realized. When I added flamenco beats to his natural rhythms, his whole body relaxed. He started making eye contact, started moving with intentionality instead of just stimming. He was dancing with me, even though he couldn't speak to me. Working with autism specialists and movement therapists, Rosalia had developed an approach that used flamenco's complex rhythmic structures to help nonverbal autistic children develop new forms of communication and emotional expression. Flamenco isn't just dance, it's conversation, Rosalia emphasized. The clapping, the stomping, the hand movements all communicate specific emotions and stories. Autistic children who can't use words can learn to use their bodies to express what they're feeling, what they need, what they're thinking. Over 7 years, Rosalia's program had reached 89 severely autistic children who had been unable to develop spoken language or conventional communication skills. Each session was adapted to the child's specific movement patterns, sensory needs, and emotional responses, with flamenco techniques modified to create personalized communication systems. I worked with this girl named Carmen, who was 9 and had never spoken, Rosalia remembered with emotion. Carmen would have meltdowns several times a day because she couldn't communicate her needs or frustrations. Her parents were exhausted, her teachers didn't know how to help her, and Carmen was becoming increasingly isolated. The transformation had come when Rosalia discovered that Carmen's meltdown patterns actually contained rhythmic elements that could be channeled into flamenco movements. By teaching Carmen to stomp her frustrations and clap her needs, Carmen had developed a movement vocabulary that her family could understand and respond to. Carmen learned to stomp twice when she was hungry, 3 times when she was tired, do specific hand movements when she wanted to play or needed comfort. Rosalia explained. Her meltdowns stopped because she finally had a way to communicate that people could understand. Her whole family learned her movement language. The approach worked because it honored autistic children's natural movement patterns instead of trying to suppress them, transforming repetitive behaviors into intentional communication while providing sensory satisfaction through rhythmic activity. There was this boy named Antonio who was 10 and had been considered completely unreachable, Rosalia shared with obvious love. Antonio had never made eye contact, never responded to his name, spent most of his time spinning in circles. Everyone assumed he wasn't aware of other people. Antonio's sessions had revealed a child with sophisticated understanding of rhythm and pattern, who was able to communicate complex emotions through flamenco movements once he learned the system. Antonio's spinning had been transformed into intentional turns that expressed joy, his hand flapping had become clapping that indicated excitement, and his rocking had evolved into rhythmic stomping that showed contentment. Antonio started making eye contact during our sessions because he realized I was listening to his body language, Rosalia said with pride. He began initiating interactions, reaching for my hands to start dancing, even laughing when we created rhythms together. His parents cried when they saw him connecting with another person for the first time. The most profound breakthroughs happen when families learn to communicate with their autistic children through movement, creating household languages that honored their children's neurological differences instead of fighting against them. Carmen is now 16 and teaches flamenco to other autistic kids, Rosalia said with joy. She still doesn't speak with words, but she's become fluent in movement communication. She helps translate between autistic children and their families, showing them how to listen with their eyes instead of their ears. Several children who had participated in Rosalia's program had gone on to develop their own movement communication systems, becoming advocates for nonverbal autism awareness and proving that intelligence and emotional complexity don't require spoken language. Tonight's appearance on The Tonight Show was supposed to focus on Rosalia's latest album, which explored themes of cultural identity, artistic evolution, and breaking down communication barriers through music. Jimmy had planned to discuss her creative process, maybe get her to demonstrate some flamenco moves, definitely tap into the innovative energy that made her such a groundbreaking artist. The interview had started with Rosalia's characteristic intensity and warmth. She had shared insights about her new music, discussed her approach to honoring flamenco traditions while creating modern sounds, and charmed the audience with her passionate commitment to her art and culture. But when Jimmy asked about how Rosalia used movement and rhythm to connect with different audiences, and whether her background in traditional flamenco had taught her anything about nonverbal communication, something shifted in her expression. The question had been meant to explore her artistic philosophy, but it had touched on something much more personal that Rosalia had been considering sharing publicly for the first time. You know, Jimmy, Rosalia said, her voice taking on unusual depth, I learned as a child that when words fail you, your body becomes your voice. And that lesson led me to work with children who have the most beautiful voices. They just speak through movement instead of words. The audience grew quieter, sensing that Rosalia was moving into territory that was more profound than her usual discussions about music and cultural expression. That sounds like you have some personal experience with that, Jimmy said with genuine interest. Rosalia was quiet for a moment, her dynamic energy softened by vulnerability. I couldn't speak in social situations for almost 2 years as a child due to severe anxiety. Everyone thought I was being difficult, but flamenco became my language when words were impossible. That experience taught me to recognize when bodies are trying to communicate. The studio was completely focused on Rosalia's words now, the energy shifting from entertainment to something much more meaningful and personal. Rosalia, it sounds like you're working with children who face similar communication challenges, Jimmy said softly. Rosalia's eyes filled with tears, a sight that was particularly powerful, coming from someone known for her fierce confidence and artistic control. For 7 years, I've been teaching flamenco to severely autistic children who can't speak. These kids have incredibly rich inner worlds, but the world sees their silence and movement patterns as problems to fix instead of languages to learn. The audience was completely silent now, witnessing a side of Rosalia that transcended her celebrity, the profound empathy of someone who had transformed her own communication trauma into a bridge for children trapped in neurological isolation. Jimmy, can I tell you about something that's taught me what real communication means? Rosalia asked, her voice growing stronger despite her tears. Please, Jimmy replied, clearly understanding that something sacred was being shared. Rosalia took a deep breath and spoke directly to the camera. I teach flamenco to nonverbal autistic children through my Ritmo del Alma program. 89 kids over 7 years who can't speak with words but can communicate entire conversations through rhythm and movement. Jimmy's expression changed completely as he grasped what Rosalia was describing. You're teaching flamenco to autistic children who can't speak? I'm teaching the world to listen to children whose bodies are already speaking, Rosalia replied with conviction. These kids aren't broken or deficient. They're communicating in a language most people don't know how to hear. Flamenco teaches families how to have conversations through movement. Tears were streaming down Jimmy's face. Can you tell us about one of these children? Miguel was 8 when I met him, Rosalia said, her voice becoming tender. Completely nonverbal, having meltdowns because he couldn't communicate his needs. But when I watched his repetitive movements, I saw rhythm, patterns, a child whose body was already dancing. Rosalia paused, gathering herself to continue. I started mirroring Miguel's movements and adding flamenco rhythms to his natural patterns. For the first time in months, he stopped his aggressive behaviors and started moving with me intentionally. He was having a conversation through dance. What happened to Miguel? Jimmy asked through his tears. Miguel is now 15 and helps teach other autistic children flamenco communication, Rosalia said with obvious pride. He still doesn't speak with words, but he's fluent in movement language. He shows families that their autistic children are already communicating. They just need to learn how to listen. The audience was openly emotional, many people crying as they witnessed this revelation about Rosalia's private work helping nonverbal children find their voice through movement. Rosalia, how has this work changed your understanding of communication? Jimmy asked. It's taught me that the most important conversations happen not with words, but with presence and attention, Rosalia replied with wisdom. These children showed me that intelligence and emotion don't require speech. They require someone who's willing to learn your language, whatever that language might be. As the segment concluded, something unprecedented happened. The entire studio audience rose in sustained applause that lasted over 5 minutes, but it wasn't just appreciation, it was recognition of communication, transcending barriers, acknowledgement that they had witnessed someone using art to prove that every child has a voice worth hearing. Rosalia's revelation became one of the most shared Tonight Show segments in the program's history, inspiring conversations about autism acceptance, the importance of alternative communication methods, and the power of movement to build bridges between neurotypical and neurodivergent communities. Most importantly, Rosalia's disclosure had shown that sometimes the most important performances happen not on stages, but in therapy rooms where children learn that their bodies can speak the language their voices cannot, proving that communication is not about conforming to typical expectations, but about finding the rhythm that allows every soul to dance their truth.